Welcome back to the Tiffin Sports Performance Rise podcast. This week, this is episode 2. We'll be talking about building athletic kids and what parents need to know. So I'm Dr. Ren Beeler, Doctor of Physical Therapy at Legend Physical Therapy and Performance.
Dr. Shane Beeler here, Doctor of Physical Therapy, co-owner of Legend Physical Therapy and Performance.
And I'm Justin Roofing, co-owner of CrossFit Tiffin. We have been in business in Tiffin for 13 years.
Yeah, so today, like we said, we'll be talking about adolescent athletics. Some of the main things we're going to be talking about today is, what is the importance of athletic development in kids, avoiding early specialization, strength training for kids, what parents need to know to support their kids in athletics, and then what a good plan for adolescents in athletics might look like.
Yeah, I think we're also going to cover some of the common myths you might hear about strength training and things like that for kids that just don't turn out to be very true. And it's good for people to know that because they might hold their kid back from doing something because of some belief they have that, doesn't hold a light to a candle in real life. So
Yep.
And I'm going to try to give some recommendations. I've got 2 kids. They are currently 11 and 14. So some of the things that we've done that has been successful for them, and some ideas for parents so that they can, if you've got young kids, some ideas for you to help them to develop and be a better athlete as they grow. So enjoy doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for some background, Ren and I grew up competing in athletics, pretty much year round. Pretty much different sport though, like 3-sport athletes.
Different seasonal.
Yeah. We would play football, then we ran cross country at some point, basketball, and then in the spring we tried baseball once, but we stuck to track mostly was our number one sport. So and I know Justin was a pretty big athlete himself.
Yep, same thing. A seasonal athlete. I think that's back in our day. It was typical to be a seasonal athlete. Springtime was time for baseball, summertime. When your youth was time for baseball. In the fall, you do football. Over the winter, you're doing your winter sport, basketball, swimming, whatever it happens to be in your area and in your family. So,
Cool. Let's talk about. Let's start off with why, or how we should go about building athletic development in kids. Well, that'll be like our first category here.
Okay, cool. So you're talking just in general, right?
Yeah.
I think the first thing is that kids aren't, mini adults. Exactly. I think it's a big concept to, can't treat them like adults when you're talking about sport performance exactly. I really like niching down in one thing. It's just not a good idea, which, we'll get into. Fun facts, just kind of to start this off with, 88% of Olympians are multi-sport athletes as kids. 95% of the NFL draft in a 5-year span had played multiple sports in high school. So these kids don't just play football. They're multi-sport athletes. They're really good athletes, and then they play their sport second. But I think it's really the analogy is kind of that I like is like a toolbox. I think you can look at movement and building general athleticism as like a toolbox. The more tools your kid has, like jumping, running, crawling, sprinting, climbing, the more prepared they're going to be for their sport. Specializing too early is like giving them a hammer and being like, all right, go make this tool work for every job that's going to come up.
Yeah. Yep. I think another point you can make off that is not only is them building tools in the toolbox to figure out what tool is best for the job, but also, some people are just naturally inclined to be better at certain sports. And if they never get the exposure to that because they've only played one sport their whole life, how are they ever going to know? You're trying to force a square object into a round hole or something. It's a lot harder than it needs to be for some people.
They could be naturally very skilled or naturally very inclined to a sport, and you may never know it if they never try that sport or never try that type of activity.
Exactly.
Oh, I know for Ren and I, we, for whatever reason, I mean, we had run track. We started like real young, CYO, like fourth grade.
We were in fourth grade.
And then we ran
organized.
4 through 6, and then all of our buddies played baseball, and they're like, you guys got to play baseball. Like, so we're like, all right, whatever, we'll try it. And like, we were like all for it. We're like, oh, we told our parents, like, we don't want to run track anymore. Like, we want to play baseball. We go out and play baseball. Horrible. We were terrible at baseball. And we played t-ball, like in Little League growing up. Yeah, we went back to track, and that worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah.
And we knew, we're like, this is our sport.
Shane
like, we're
and
good
I,
at this naturally.
Naturally, we're more inclined to do any sports that involved running.
Yeah.
Like if you were better at running, that made us better at that sport. But all the other aspects, we tend to not be very strong.
We don't excel in that stuff.
Yeah. And like as a parent, like all parents have a bias, right? For me, I played football. I want my boy to play football, right? But whatever sports you do like, I still think it's important to find opportunities in your area for your kids to play other sports. So. At a young age, some of the sports that are available right away, I think it's important to get them in some sort of organized sport on a team, listening to a coach. You have t-ball right off the bat at a young age.
Yeah.
Soccer is available a lot of times right off the bat. Gymnastics. I have no interest in my kid being a gymnast someday, but both of my kids did gymnastics because it was available.
We did as well.
They were 4 years old, and gymnastics was available to them. At the Y. So they both did some gymnastics when they were young. Soccer. I was a football player.
Yeah.
And my son's not going to play soccer in high school, but still, that's a valuable thing to get them running, listening to a coach, being on a team, building athleticism in a lot of different ways.
Right.
So don't pigeonhole your kids into the sports that you like necessarily, or the sports that you envision them doing someday.
Yeah.
Just find a wide variety as early as you can to get them into.
Right. Yeah. The other great thing about doing other sports too is, from our perspective, things we look at in a physical therapy lens is, it's going to help kids build better balance, better motor control, better coordination, and all those things add up too. And when they do decide, or if they ever do decide to get a little more specialized, or decide they like one sport more than another, those skills carry over into other sports.
Yeah,
it's
they're better athletes, and some of that stuff can help against like future injuries. Like the more, the better like motor control, balance, those sorts of things they have. Even things like down the road, like ACL injuries, like those things can help prevent those down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So,
cool. And one thing that we look at, we have our CrossFit Kids program here, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
That's great to get kids into, to get them doing different, a wide variety of movement types. One thing that is important is getting your kids inverted, so upside down, not like hanging upside down, but doing things. You can do this in your living room. You can do this in your out in your yard, and that's why we got our kids into gymnastics early. Cartwheels, somersaults, flips, stuff like that. Works with their inner ear.
I was gonna say it's good. It's good for developing like your vestibular system. It's a great stimulus for that.
So any of that stuff where we're getting inverted periodically is valuable for their development. And hanging from things. So hanging from a bar, hanging from a tree branch, hanging from
trees,
different parts of their swing sets and stuff like that. So that's another thing.
Definitely.
That's important that you kind of wouldn't think about for their future athletic development. So
yeah, definitely. So I think we're all kind of on track. Generalized athletic development as a kid or youth, fantastic idea. Let's talk about that. We see it all the time nowadays, the early specialization in sports where it's like, a kid's going to play baseball. I think of baseball, volleyball, softball. Those are or like basketball. Those are the big ones I can think of where they do them like year round, and they're starting really young, like even before high school, like in the very adolescent years. Let's talk about that, why it might be like bad to avoid, what like some of the alternatives are, what are some pros and cons? Because obviously there's going to be pros and cons with that.
Yeah.
I think the cons outweigh the pros when we get to some of the topics.
Yeah, so I think the one thing to think of is that kids who specialize in one sport, especially at like younger ages, so we think like middle school, end of middle school, junior high,
they're much 12
more,
or younger.
Yeah, much more likely to get burned out and get injuries compared to their fellow classmates and people they might be playing on like their school teams with. They tend to develop those things at a younger age. Things we wouldn't think about, like overuse, chronic injuries, in 7th grade.
Right.
Yep.
Things we see in ultra endurance athletes, we're shouldn't be seeing in junior high athletes. Yeah. It's not normal.
And we talk about burnout. Couple things on that. The school I coach at, we started a 5th and 6th grade football team.
Yeah.
And the intent of that, we did not have one. We started a 5th and 6th grade football team, and the intent was hey, by the time they get to high school, they're going to be better at football. We're going to have more kids on the team. It's going to improve, your varsity, your main goal is to make it so you improve your varsity football program.
Right.
And what we found was we had less kids going out for 7th grade football because they started that attrition in 5th and 6th grade.
Yeah.
If they have one negative experience and they think, man, I don't know if I want to play football
do it next year.
So we started actually having less kids in our junior high program, and then kids that when they were 5th or 6th grade were maybe the pudgy kid, or they were they
really small.
They had not developed physically. They were short. They were then they developed those things in their head.
Weight, yeah.
Then they get to their sophomore year of high school and they hit a growth spurt, and now they're 6'4" and 260 pounds, and now they've already had a bad experience and they're not coming out for the team.
Yeah.
We've had that exact thing happen
multiple times. Yeah.
And the other thing, burnout wise, A, they can have some bad experiences. B, some kids, the other thing we saw is some kids can just only play so many years of football, an intense sport like that, or any sport. So we actually had less kids going on to play college football. They played 5th and 6th. They played 5th and 6th, 7th and 8th, 4 years of high school football. That's 8 total years.
Yeah.
And now by the time it's time to decide if they want to play college sports or college sport and whatever.
Yeah.
Or football in this example, they don't have that desire anymore because they've kind of used up their lifespan or their gas tank on that sport.
Yeah.
So
that definitely, I know personally for us, I think we played City League football here in Tiffin. We started 5th grade.
Yeah, I think around.
And then we played all the way through 8th grade, junior high, and when we got to high school, and we were definitely smaller kids, didn't weigh a lot, didn't physically develop until we were in high school. I think in high school put me in football would have been awesome. Would have enjoyed it a lot more. Yeah, being undersized and stuff as a kid, we got to high school and I was I'm going to switch sports. I'm going to play something else. This one's not for me. And I think had we started football later, I think we probably something we would have continued with.
That was the other thing. I mean, the same thing as it was our choice too to do football. I mean, we wanted to do it at the time.
Yeah,
and then we got older. We like other sports too. So but yes. Yeah, I think it could have been totally different had we started later.
Yeah.
As well. So
for sure. But let's talk about, and I want to talk to kind of Ren about these ones, the year-round sports.
Yeah.
What we see with like I said, really the big ones are baseball or softball.
Okay.
Some of the injuries we see related to that, what they are, why we're getting those, and maybe what we should maybe swap to.
Yeah. So I'd say the big thing that we touched on earlier for people to remember is that kids aren't just miniature adults, and we have to think about that when they're doing sports because they're not skeletally mature at that age. So
what's that mean? Yeah.
Well, what that means is especially their bones haven't fully developed. So at the end of our bones, most people are familiar with the term growth plates. So those growth plates are still open. Their bones are still growing. So we have to keep that in mind because the amount of loads and stresses we put on those bones can cause some stresses there that typical children might not experience, and it can alter their development and the growth of their bones over the course of their adolescent years.
Yeah, let's cover a couple of the common ones that people probably see. They might not even know they see them, but some people know. And they'll be like, "Oh, I was a kid. I remember having this."
One of the first ones I think of is called GIRD, G-I-R-D, and it stands for glenohumeral internal rotation deficit. We see that a lot in overhead athletes. So baseball, especially baseball pitchers and things like that. And it has to do with the end of the bone, your humerus in your arm, in your throwing arm. What we would see is basically the ball on the end of your humerus would get rotated. So we would have someone come into our clinic, and we generally, we do a full evaluation. We would screen their range of motion in their shoulders. On their non-throwing arm, we might see a relatively normal range of motion, about 90 degrees of shoulder external rotation, a little less than that, shoulder internal rotation. On the other side, we might see an excess of shoulder rotation.
Yeah.
Like external rotation. They might have 110, 120 degrees here.
Yeah.
Yet, they only have 30 degrees of internal rotation or something like that. So we look at that, and relatively, we look at the total arc of motion should be the same.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
That's something we want to address. But we look at that shift. That total arc of motion gets shifted. It has to do with the forces of repetitive motions on that bone causes the torsion of the bone to change.
Those growth years. And some of that is good. Like some of that adaptation is good. You look at like a lot of MLB pitchers, they're all going to have that. They have more external rotation, and it's not everyone just thinking, oh, their shoulders, like it's more loose. Maybe it is. A lot of them have labral tears and stuff, but a lot of it is their bony development allows them to do that, which that's an adaptation from doing that for so long. But it also leads to a problem when they're kids. They get, they get apophysitis in their shoulders, and they can have little league or elbow, and all these things that later down the road can cause a lot of problems. So that's why you just have to be cognizant of those things.
And then we'll see it in the weight room. Kids that have gone through, and especially our pitchers that we see, we see them in the weight room. They have some trouble with mobility overhead. They have trouble with some of the upper body strength, not so much upper body strength, but they're just a little more prone to injury just because their shoulder isn't moving, as it was kind of designed to do.
Absolutely. And it's can be asymmetrical side to side, and that can be difficult too, because a lot of they don't understand that, and they try to make sure everything should be symmetrical and the same, and it's like, well, for some people that maybe that might not be the case for them as they start to do more of those types of activities.
With a bench press and overhead press, we'll see that. We'll see it on a back squat where they're reaching back and holding onto the barbell, and one elbow's way forward and now that makes it so that their spine and their low back is a little bit dealing with some different loads. And you'll see it as them actually the barbell wanting to twist like clockwise or counterclockwise as they try to hold it on their backs.
Right. I say one of the other ones you want to see is like in basketball or running or jumping sports is like when your teen has like knee pain right below like the knee cap. A lot of times they're like, oh, they have patellar tendon issues, or there's something weird going on the knee, or they tore a meniscus or something. And it's like, especially in those like early growing years, happens to females a little bit earlier, males a little bit later. But they get what's called like apophysitis on their tibia, where like their tendon from their leg muscles connect to the front of their shin. And it's really what happens is that bone is...
What do most people know that as? Because
everyone knows it. Everyone knows it as what's called as Osgood-Schlatters. If you've ever seen those people with the little knee bands, it's just like a thin strap they wrap around their knee, or they use... I know a lot of athletes right now wear like... they'll do like a pre-wrap or something like that, especially high school athletes or like junior high. It's because of that. It can help with the pain, but that stuff is just an overuse injury.
For some kids, it also looks cool.
It looks cool, too. I was
going to say, sometimes it's just...
if you're... A lot of times, though, like that... Specifically, that pain for like running, jumping sports, it can be debilitating for your teens, and that's really an overuse. That's a sign like they got to pull back. You got to stop doing so much. Like they're putting too much stress to that area. A lot of times it's during a growth spurt time when they start to get a lot of that pain, and it's like during that time, unfortunately, you just got to talk to the coach, talk to a medical professional. Like you got to pull back a little bit.
And unfortunately, sometimes those things are going to come up even without a ton of activity, because like I said, those bones are still growing. It's part of the process as we get more towards skeletal maturity. But if that does become a problem, it's symptomatic. We're going to have to adjust how much they're doing, because we can't have someone here having pain, limping around. That's not good for young athletes.
My son is 14 and hit a growth spurt. So this year during track season, he had some knee pain like that, and we had 2 weeks of the track season where he had to dial back his training a little bit. He's a hurdler, so we just had to, he didn't hurdle for about a week and a half. He just did hurdle drills, but he just didn't do like full jumping over hurdles and racing over hurdles. And it settled back down.
Absolutely.
And then he was good to go on that. So you just got to be smart.
Absolutely. And it's fun. Like, you have teens that are good at sports. You're like, man, I want them to do well in competitions. They want to do well in competition, but sometimes you do have to pull back and realize that this isn't professional athletics. They're not skeletally mature. They can't always handle all that extra work that it takes to be like elite level performance all the time, and that's okay. They're still growing. They're kids. They need to have fun more so than anything else while they're doing their sport.
And that's an example where you have to keep like when your kid is in 5th grade, your goal is not for them to be the best 5th grade baseball player or volleyball player. You got to keep the end goal in sight.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
and for that, it's, maybe it's high school. Maybe you want them to be all Ohio in their sport, or you want them to be able to go into college and play in that sport. And, you want to keep that in mind when they're young. We got to keep them healthy.
Absolutely.
We got to keep them enjoying it.
Yeah.
And, to increase that likelihood that later on they're going to be able to perform at a high level.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the emphasis should definitely be on like fun and play and like body awareness, not like winning at those younger ages. I think like end of high school is like a good time to be competitive with sports. You're a lot more mature, skeletally, muscularly. Your body can handle a lot more of that work. That's why I think of like running. A freshman in high school cannot handle as much of a workload as like a senior in high school can. They just like physically. They are not able to handle that stuff. They're going to get hurt. They're not going to be able to perform. They're going to have some burnout if they're trying to do what all those older kids are trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to be, in adolescent sports, that's something that coaches need to be aware of. And I think a lot of times they're treated the same when they should not be.
Yeah.
There should be some differes in like workload and training and stuff like that.
It's important to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
But while we're on the topic of avoiding too early of specializations. We talked about this a little bit in last week's episode, so there's a plug to go check that out if you're interested. But the other thing to keep in mind is for some kids who get specialized, especially who see it in, for example, one sport too early, distance runners. So 60% of adolescent runners who specialize in that, so basically they're running more than 9 months out of the year doing that. Distance running, they'll have low bone mineral density.
Yeah, that's crazy
Yeah.
as a kid to
Yeah.
have low bone mineral density.
Yeah, it is. And it just goes to show the effects that can have on our body. But the other interesting thing is that they've also done some studies where they've compared like soccer players, which is much more like multi-directional sport, versus distance running, which is very linear, very repetitive forces. And they've looked at the bone structure and how that can change. So for soccer, where they're doing a lot of different directions, that bone, basically we call it like the cortical bone that's in the circumference of it, so like the shape of it, it's much more round, and the bone is evenly distributed around it. And this is specifically looking at like your tibia, your shin bone, versus runners of the same age. They'll look at their bone, and it's a much more like this oblong angle, looks more like an like triangle
of some degree.
Yeah, where the forces of those repetitive strains have caused the bone to adapt in a certain way, and it's not ideal because it weakens our bones to other forces, and it sets them up for risk for other injuries like stress fractures. Cool thing is, listen to this, they've actually seen, so people that have played soccer, and I'm sure it might be extrapolated out, but I don't know for sure, but for this research study, people that have played soccer, they have protective benefits of that 20 to 30 years later in life, where they're at like a 40% reduced risk of fractures.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is that just like lower extremity fractures? Right,
Honestly, I don't know for sure.
I
don't know. I'm assuming it's for lower extremity because they're not doing a ton of upper extremity stuff.
Right.
But that's important when we start thinking, 30 years down the road, we're still getting benefits of, basically that variability that comes with certain types of sports.
No, that's awesome.
And that's one of the benefits of playing different sports and not being specialized too early is we get that variety of stresses and loads and things to our bodies to adapt to, instead of just the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of our examples we wanted to use for this was like a CrossFit Kids versus like year-round like baseball, gymnastics, etc.
A CrossFit Kids program, we're looking similar to just a normal CrossFit program. We're looking to utilize as many modalities or as many types of movements as we possibly can. All right, so we're going to run, we're going to jump, we're going to lift, we're going to crawl, we're going to carry things, we're going to press, we're going to do different gymnastic skills that we can, within a typical gym. Run, climb, all that stuff. So we want to expose them to as many different experience as we can, get them moving in as many different movement patterns as we can.
Yeah,
so
definitely. Ren and I are definitely not like pediatric physical therapists where we treat like really young kids. We treat adolescents, but yeah, I know like that's if you've ever been in one of those clinics, like it looks like these kids are just playing when they're doing like their therapy stuff, and it's like that's what a lot of like kids need just with general activity, fitness, sports. They need to be playing, have a variety of things to do, having a good time.
Yeah, build the foundation for things down the road. Like, start general. You can get more specific as you get older,
right?
But definitely that age, and that sounds like fun stuff to be doing.
Oh,
yes.
exactly.
Like
if you're a kid, I would love that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Come in and enjoy that. It's not like something on the calendar that you got to check off. Like, had to go to class today, get my workout.
And that's what the number one priority for our CrossFit Kids program is. It's got to be fun.
Yeah,
and we got to teach the kids that fitness is fun.
Yeah,
and kind of just an overview of like a typical class. We've dialed in on a pretty effective structure for our classes.
Okay.
We warm the kids up,
okay.
And we want to as for an adult or an older athlete, we want to warm up the tissues and movement prep and all that stuff. But the main thing is we want to get the kids moving and we want to get them breathing hard.
Yeah,
and that's going to help us in the next part of the class to have their attention, right? So after a good warm up, they're breathing hard, they're sweating, they need a quick drink break when they're done. We go right into a fun activity, like a relay, an obstacle course, or a review of movements from the previous CrossFit Kids class. So that's where we take those movements and we get them to recall those and reinforce those movements and practice those movements. Then, once again, they're out of breath. We've done a activity to get them moving. Then we learn. Okay, so at that point in class, if we have any new movements that we're going to teach them, that's where we learn any new movements. And then, or it's where we're going to practice any complex movements. So if we've been working on different lifts, snatches or cleans, any of our powerlifting lifts like back squats, where we've got a lot of things to remember and recall, that's where we'll practice those things. All right. Then once we've learned those movements or practice those movements, then we finish with either a game or a workout, or it's really for the CrossFit Kids, it's the same thing.
Right. Absolutely.
We would call it a game for them. Yeah. Or one and the same, using the movements that the kids just learned.
Right.
So we're constantly teaching and then practicing those movements, teaching, recalling movements.
Yeah.
So,
no, that's awesome. I think this is a good time to bust some myths about some of this stuff. I think the biggest one we hear is like my kid has to play one sport to get good at it. Like they got to just do that. It could be a one sport athlete. Yeah. They play this year round just so they can be good. In reality, kids, they're 15, 16, 17 years old. Often they don't specialize. The ones that you think of that are the best. So like early on, they were multi-sport athletes. They developed a good athletic foundation. And those are the ones that are usually healthy when they're older, competing.
Yeah,
they do a pretty good job.
I think even Shane brought up a good point earlier about like the NFL Combine and that type of stuff. How such a large percentage, was 95% or something like that,
over like a 5-year span.
Yeah, were participating in multi sports at a high school level, and I think that just goes to show that that's important, that we're not specializing too early and we're pinholing ourselves into one area, and not just for health reasons, but for performance reasons as well.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but if maybe your kid is really good at a sport and they're a phenom at it and they're really going to focus on that sport, then you should get them into a well-rounded strength and conditioning program to help support them in that. Absolutely. And that's the big key and the big piece of the puzzle here. If we are going to specialize in what sport we're going to play, we need to get them into a strength and conditioning program that's going to help them stay injury-free and help support all that activity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if they're in doing that in a place, they'll probably be able to get some guidance. Like, from Shane and I's standpoint, we can provide some guidance for somebody in terms of activity recommendations overall, and make sure people are getting adequate rest throughout the year. If they're like, hey, year round I'm playing this, like, okay, well, we need to get some other stimulus in there. We need to make sure we're taking rest. We need to make sure like the total volume is not too much of one thing, because that's where kind of like
come
from.
That stoplight analogy of like, okay, like, you're having this, whatever, you have questions on this, okay, like that's a green light, keep doing what you're doing. Hey, these things are yellow lights. We maybe need to think about adjusting things or pull back, and then you hit a red light. It's like, okay, we got to pull back. Yeah. We got to reassess. Like this is not going the direction we need it to go in, or something bad could end up happening with something like this.
Yeah. And then from a strength and conditioning aspect, if we do have an athlete who comes in and they do a lot of throwing, maybe they're a young quarterback, they do a lot of 7-on-7 and throwing, they're a pitcher, any overhead throwing athlete, if they're right-handed, then we're going to look at, in our strength and conditioning program, let's make sure we're working the left side so that we don't get any imbalances there.
Right.
And let's work on, the other thing that we really look at is strengthening their back, the back muscles to improve our posture, to help. That's going to help that shoulder recover and help support that shoulder as they're.
I think you bring up a good point there. Like, so the surrounding musculature around just your shoulder joint, your shoulder blade supporting that. You'll hear an analogy in physical therapy. They say, you can't shoot a cannon out of a canoe. Yeah. And like your shoulder joint would be the cannon and your shoulder blade would be the canoe. So we need a nice stable base to do those activities from. So building that stability, that strength up to support, all the activity that you are doing in the right ways, making sure you're maintaining that flexibility and mobility in the areas that you need, because we know you're going to be getting stressed in certain areas. Definitely important.
Yeah. I think another myth is that, a coach or someone will just say, oh, they're just sore. It's part of the game. But like when you're 11 or 12 years old, like soreness is one thing.
Yeah.
But like when you're 11 and you have elbow or shoulder pain every time you're throwing a baseball, like that is not normal, and it's not just part of the game. That's your body waving the red flag. There's a big red light. Yeah. You're like, something's not right. We got to pull back here.
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure.
And that's also knowing your kid and kind of knowing some of the psychology of it, and knowing like, okay, my kid really wants to be in this game. Yeah. And if they're complaining of pain, then they're actually in pain. Like when my son complained of knee pain and he had to miss a hurdle race because of that, like I knew okay, there's something actually happening here, because I know he wants to be in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's important for the parents to be involved in that,
100%.
In that sense, and be able to
just some awareness
to help, like say someone where they're like, they come in to see Shane and I, and they're like, my knee, I'm talking to somebody 12 years old, my knee hurts, and it's like, okay, well, I'm trying to figure out how bad it is. You don't always get the best answers from a 12-year-old, but having the parent there and they can give some feedback, like Justin saying, like, hey, listen, like something's wrong, because this is out of character for them.
Something's not right.
Things like that is to look for, and it can be very beneficial. So having those types of eyes, things to keep out, keep a lookout for. Sometimes very important.
Sometimes if they're getting mentally burnt out, sometimes that pain is really just them kind of calling out, like, hey, I need a break from this. So
definitely,
that can also be the case sometimes.
Cool. You guys want to move on to the next one?
Let's talk about strength training, because I know we were mentioning it a little bit. We started talking about some of it, like what the benefits of strength training for kids. And some of the
more on the myth side.
Yeah, some of the myths around that I think gets brought up a lot of times. They're like, we can't start strength training too early for kids because it's bad. It's going to stunt their growth. I think a lot of people have heard that. I've had a lot of people personally tell me like, is this okay for them to be doing? Like, is this going to like affect their growth or anything like that? So let's talk about that a little bit. Shane, maybe you can start, and then
I'll start all, and then Justin can chime in, and we'll all kind of take our turn on this one. But the big myth is that lifting stunts growth, and I think science says otherwise, right? There's no evidence to support this. Strength training is safe and it's beneficial when it's supervised. That's the big thing with younger athletes. I think the myth that weightlifting causes or stunts your growth kind of came from a combination of two things. One is misinterpretation of injury data, and two was an overprotective mindset towards kids' growth plates. I think as evidence has come out and we've seen more kids doing strength training, they've realized hey, this isn't actually stunting growth. I think there's a couple of reasons why people might have believed it. One was that there was fear of damaging growth plates. Like when your growth plate is open, for kids is 14 to 16, maybe a little bit later. Females, it's a little bit younger.
They start to close up.
Yeah, they start to close up. Yeah. They're open until around those ages. That's when you're going to have your biggest growth spurts.
Yeah.
But really, injuries are happening more from like trauma, improper lifting form, lifting too much weight when they shouldn't be, dropping weights, improper form. Exactly. Those are when those things, and I think those were getting blamed for strength training itself rather than poor supervision or technique. So the logic becomes like, oh, weights equal risk to growth plates. Yeah. It stunts their growth. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's anecdotal stories too. People are like, oh, well, these, people that have been lifting super long, like these Olympic weightlifters, they're all short. And it's like, well, that's just like selection bias. It's sport selection bias.
Yes.
These are the people that strive in their sport because they have the best mechanical advantage because their body type, and it gives them the most advantage to lift the most weight, and especially in something that's like a weight-based, they're in weight categories.
Yep.
Lifting weight, and people see that and they just equate that anecdotally with something they think is true, but it's just a total myth.
Yeah. And I think especially there was a study looking at femur length. So if I look at Olympic weightlifters and elite Olympic weightlifters, a lot of them have short femurs, but that's because that gives you a mechanical advantage and gives you an advantage as a weightlifter. So it was a little bit of, the term would be like causation or whatever, where, they said that one thing was leading to another when really.
Yeah, correlation is not causation.
Yeah. You look at any other sport, though, basketball. I mean, you look at just height.
Yeah,
height is definitely an advantage in a sport like basketball versus you don't see an NBA team where all 5 guys are under 6 foot tall. Right. I mean, it's just not. Some people are better, and that's one of the reasons why we recommend let your kids try all these different sports because for them they might naturally be better and enjoy a sport that you never thought of
or something you didn't enjoy, so they didn't play it when they were younger. Yeah. I also think that myth comes from some of the outdated, there was like some child labor population, and there was some data on them, and it was showing, a lot of different data. But I think, again, it was a misinterpretation, and it was applied to modern strength training. Like, those kids are facing long hours of child labor. They weren't getting the proper nutrition. They weren't recovering. So it's not the same as structured strength training. Mm-hmm. So we need to get rid of this myth that strength training for kids is going to stunt their growth and they shouldn't be doing it.
It'd be like looking and saying bouncing a basketball makes you taller.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because really good basketball players tend to be taller.
They've been bouncing a basketball
all that bouncing of the basketball made them grow taller.
Yeah. I was going to say, and even like the National Strength Conditioning Association, they have stances on this saying that no current evidence indicates that resistance training harms growth in children. In fact, it can enhance bone density, body composition, and motor performance. Yeah. Same thing, the American Academy of Pediatrics. Properly designed and supervised strength training programs are safe and effective for children. All of these, these are national organizations that are now seeing all this data and showing that, yes, as long as there's supervision and there's coaching and they're doing it correctly, it is good for kids to get out there,
safe to do,
get some strength training in, as well as, competing in sports.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's talk about, we can talk about our Tiffin Sports Performance.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, CrossFit Kids, we have doctors of PT supervising some of this stuff. Let's talk about how we introduce some of that stuff safely with the kind of our Tiffin Sports Performance classes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say for me, and Justin can chime in too on CrossFit Kids, but especially if I have a younger, adolescent, technique is always going to be one of the things we put a lot of emphasis on, as we've talked about. Yeah. So introducing especially lifting, say we want to get into some squatting. If we're using a barbell or dumbbells or any type of resisted weight, we want to make sure the technique is good first, and we start with minimal to no resistance. Yep. Maybe we're simulating a barbell with a PVC pipe or something like that, and we're building up the foundation, so that way when we do get into a little more specific strengthening exercises and progressions of that, we know we're working with a good foundation. Some solid technique.
Yep.
We're doing everything the way we're supposed to be, and we're minimizing the risk of any injuries or anything like that going on.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, we teach for CrossFit Kids, and if we're working with any athletes in sports performance.
Yeah, younger.
Learning everything with the PVC pipe and all the movements that we do, all the lifts that we do. And we're only going to add weight if their form is fantastic. And we're constantly reviewing that because we could have a tipping point where They squat with
do
the
too much,
PVC
yeah.
pipe. PVC pipe, they look great.
Yeah.
Empty barbell, they look great. We get to a certain load, and now it's enough load that we start to see some faults come out, and we got to
Absolutely.
dial it back.
Yeah.
Then build the technique, build the
Yeah.
strength, so next time we get to that weight, that those faults are gone.
Right.
But we also want to use some weight because if we use the right amount of weight, it's actually going to encourage proper form, and we're going to get the athlete and the coach is going to get proper feedback on
Absolutely.
it. So
Yeah. I think another thing to keep in mind too with like adolescents that are still growing is sometimes they can run, they might do really well with those things for a period of time. They hit a growth spurt and now it's like, Bambi all over again. It's
Yeah.
like they don't know how
They got a new
coordination-
body than they did 6 months ago.
Their body's trying to reorganize how to move, how to lift, like where they're at in space. Their
Yeah.
proprioception might be a little off. So sometimes we got to revisit that. It's not
It's good to stay on top
Yep.
of those.
yeah, somebody who's like, hey, I've been the same exact size, same exact weight for 15 years. Like they have a general sense of how their body's moving.
Right.
Yep.
Sometimes with the younger athletes, that can change as their bodies are still maturing.
right. And sometimes, like I work with athletes seasonally, such that and as they grow, at times their bench press may decrease. We see it in the bench press and the back squat a lot, where a kid hits a growth spurt, his arms are now 3 inches longer,
Right.
and his range of motion has increased a lot, and his bench press will actually decrease for a period of time.
Yep.
And same thing on the back squat,
Yeah.
and as a coach, you need to know that could happen and identify
Absolutely.
when it's going to happen when they hit
Yeah.
a growth spurt,
Yeah.
and dial it back for them, reassure them that nothing is wrong with
Right.
the
Sure.
training they're doing,
Yeah.
or nothing's wrong with them, and then we just go back to a weight that's going to move really well for them, and then we progress from there.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of looks more like what a well-rounded program looks like for like young athletes. I think a lot of it's like when you think of those big motions, it's like squatting, lunging, pushing,
Yeah.
pulling, rotating,
Yeah, a lot
carrying.
of
all those like
including
very
like
things.
multi-directional
Yes.
stuff like we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
Like we talked about earlier, the bone growth of soccer players looks better than someone who only runs because of the stressors point on. So like making sure we're like when we're jumping, it's not always the same direction. We're jumping side to side. We're jumping forward and back.
Absolutely.
We're cutting in different angles. Like we're doing things that would come up naturally for kids if they're out playing and doing activities.
Exactly.
We're just making sure that we're hitting all the bases with that.
Yeah.
So it's not getting left out, left behind, and they're just focusing on one thing.
Yeah,
We get a
of
nice
course.
variety of inputs for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the most important that Justin probably,
Yeah.
he's lived the experience here as a parent.
Yeah.
How can parents support their kids in
Yeah.
athletics, and support their athletic development without being, without overdoing it, without putting your kids at risk for injuries and
Right.
overuse issues
Yep.
and that type of stuff.
One thing I put down some notes on,
Yeah.
when your kids are young, right, what are some things you can do to get them started? We talked about, hey, find those youth sports that start early.
Yeah.
But then
Yep.
also, what can we do at home? And there's something called free play. So free play is basically them going out and kind of in their minds doing whatever they want to.
Yeah.
But we can structure that a little bit. So a couple of notes I had to encourage free play, either a backyard playground or swing set. We
Perfect.
made sure we got one of those as soon as the kids were able to get on it safely, or if we were there to supervise them, or take them to a local playground.
Right.
The backyard swing set can become so many different things for upper body strength, hanging, pulling, climbing, flexibility, going under and over things. And then, it has, swings and pull-up bars and all that stuff.
yeah.
But also the kids, you'll look out, when you're watching them come up with so many different things to do.
yeah.
To give them a wide variety of stimulus,
That's
right?
how Shane and I were.
Yeah, we had
Yes.
our dad had built we had like a double-decker treehouse,
Yep.
slide,
was
swings,
like
rope climb,
Yep.
with monkey
Fort.
bars.
Yep.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And that, that can lead, when it's free play, then sometimes the kids will spend hours doing that.
absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Another thing is, as far as a bike, a scooter, get them as many different things that they can move on as possible. Bike, scooter, I don't know about a skateboard. I never got my kids skateboards because I didn't want them to get hurt.
Right.
As many different implements like that. Balls of every kind, footballs, basketballs,
Yeah.
tennis balls, anything that they can pick up and throw,
Yeah.
large, small,
Yeah.
that they can pick up, throw, carry, stuff
Heck
like
yeah.
that.
Right.
And I think that gives you and then I talked about like in their living room, out in the yard, show them a somersault, show them a flip, get them moving like that.
Yeah.
And you got a pretty good base for them as, right there at your house as
Definitely.
A young athlete to get them started and to be well-rounded to start with.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think one thing too, Justin, like when your kids were growing up, did you ever? Well, I guess we talked about it a little bit already, but you were never like overly pushy, like you have to do this sport, you can't do this one, or you kind of like encourage it, like let them decide, like, hey, here's options.
Yep.
Decide what you want to do.
Yep. Yeah. I think at a certain age when they're really young,
you might
have to be like, hey,
let's
try it out.
We're doing T-ball.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to. Well, you're going to try it out.
Right.
So,
yeah.
When they're young, sometimes you got to get them when you're introducing them to organized sports.
Right. Sure.
Hey, we're going to get into this.
Yeah.
But then as they do that sport, like gymnastics, my son did 2 years of gymnastics, and then when year 3 came and we were like, hey, do you want to do gymnastics? And he was like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So we didn't push him into that, right?
Yeah.
But then also, we were like, well, you're going to do something.
Yeah.
So I forget off the top of my head what he went to
soccer,
then.
basketball,
but we
something.
tell them, like, we give them opportunities, right?
Yeah.
So, hey, here's your opportunities to play sports and do activities. And you can pick what you want to do, but you're going to be doing something. Basically.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think sometimes maybe some parents might get they might lose that idea a little bit, and they kind of want their kids to do what they want, and the kids might lose a little bit of the opinion or the options to choose something that they might like to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we just got to be careful as the parents, and we've had discussions with parents over the years of our practice or practicing as PTs of we can't push these kids into doing all the activities that you want to do or you want them to do. Like, they have to choose it for themselves as well.
Yeah. There's like psychological stress that comes along with that, as well as, we focus a lot on the physical, but absolutely there's a psychological component to that too, that you don't want to be overstepping your bounds on.
For sure. And one of the big things, like if a kid is going to be excel at a sport, they have to want to do it.
Yeah, they have to like it.
When they get up to bat, they got to be up there thinking, I want to crush this ball. They can't be up there thinking like, oh man, I'd rather be playing video games right now. We have a friend who was a really good distance runner in high school.
Yeah.
And when he started running distance events in junior high, he was a really good miler and he beat a lot of people because he wanted to win. And a lot of the kids running the junior high mile, they don't really want to be doing it.
They don't want to be there.
Maybe they're doing it, but they don't really care if they win or not.
Yeah.
Right.
So that psychological of, I really want to be doing this, I want to be good at this, I want to win this race, or I want to win this game, is your biggest, one of your biggest key factors for success right now.
Yeah.
And developing those skills and becoming a better athlete.
Or even just parents, if they're struggling getting their kids involved, maybe you got to reassess the situation. Maybe it's because you're trying to get them involved in what you want as the parent, and maybe you're not trying to get the kid involved in what they want as the the athlete or whatever sport they're interested in.
Absolutely.
So
cool.
Good to keep in mind.
I want to cover some physical signs as we're kind of talking about parents and support.
So this is what they can look out for.
Yes.
So like what you can look out for.
This is exactly what you can look out for to help support your kid. Okay, even if maybe your kids do it, they want to do more than you think they should be doing. These are signs you can kind of look out for that aren't right.
That
Physical,
might be doing too much.
Yeah, that you're doing too much. You need to pull back. Maybe you need to see somebody or just talk to the coach or your kid and be like, hey, kid, let's take a week or two. Let's rest for a little bit and then kind of see how you're feeling. One is just lingering soreness, pain, or fatigue that does not resolve with rest. Not normal for an adolescent to be having on a day-to-day basis. The second would be a performance plateau or decline. For example, let's take someone who's running. Your kid runs track in junior high. Say if their time is progressively getting slower and they're giving the same amount of effort, that is a large clue that they're doing too much. They need to pull back. They're burning out. They're
not
doing
recovering
too much.
enough. Something's going on.
Something's not right. Something's not helping them recover. The third one is frequent minor injuries. If every week they're coming home with something's tweaked or something's hurt and it's always new, it's another sign that they're not recovering well. They're overdoing it. Their body needs a little bit more rest. And the last one is just trouble sleeping.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be, for a kid, they should be sleeping through the night without much of a problem. If they're having a really hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, those are signs that, again, they're kind of burned out and they're overdoing it. Red flags. So these are things where it's like, okay, we definitely need to pull back. You might have to consult like a medical expert, whether it's your primary care physician, a physical therapist that works in, sports performance or works with like an adolescent population. One is that if they have no true off season for about 9 months and they've been competing that entire time, it's definitely a time that they need to take some rest for their body, pull back a little bit.
What do you think would classify as like an off season? How long?
Off season is generally like a couple of weeks. So maybe it's a month, maybe it's like 2 to 4 weeks, but it's something where they are not in organized sports.
Yeah.
They can still be doing, general activity outside. They don't have to just like sit on the couch all day.
Yeah, right.
But it's outside of organized sports. Part of that too, and that's one of the other red flags, is if they spend more than like 16 to 20 hours a week at an organized sport at around age 14 or less, that's too much. They cannot handle that as a red flag. You got to pull them out of something. One of them is playing through injuries. So especially when they're at that age, there's no reason to be having your kid play through an injury. If they're having pain, anything that's sharp or shooting or throbby, again, we talked about soreness is okay, but soreness is not the same as pain.
Yeah.
If they're having pain at that age, they need to be pulled out, take some time off. And especially the last one is when their sport starts to feel like a job. They need to not have it feel more like an obligation. It needs to be more fun. So if they're getting to that point, it's a red flag. You got to pull them out, maybe change sports, maybe give them a rest from something. But those are things we're looking out for, whether it's a physical or like a situational red flag that you can do to help support your kid when they're kind of coming up through that athletic development phase.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have too much to add to that.
No,
I think that kind of gives everyone like a couple things to look out for, physically how they're doing. Think about, their activity levels as a whole, what they're doing, and be able to adjust things from there.
For sure.
Or,
I think,
I
was just going to see what Justin had for it since he's got a couple kiddos right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, you start to dial in on I look at practice when it's time for practice. Like, hey, it's time to go to football practice, or it's time to go to volleyball practice. What sort of reaction do you get to them? Get from them right off the bat? And it's okay sometimes to get the kind of like, I don't know. But in general, they should be. They should enjoy practice, right? And especially you can tell with the kids what sports they like because they like practice,
right?
Yeah. And then. Because sometimes for games, I know with my kids, sometimes they feel a lot of pressure come game time.
Yeah.
They really like the sport.
Yeah.
When it's time to go to practice, they're like, yes, let's go. They enjoy going to practice. But then when it's time for games, they'll be like, oh man, just because they feel the pressure to perform.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a good way for me that I can tell tell the difference between whether they're like burnt out or they're starting to not like it.
Yeah.
Like for my son wrestles and loves wrestling practice, loves going and working hard and getting a great workout.
Yeah.
But then the day of the meet, you would think he does not like it because he just feels a lot of pressure to perform well.
Right.
Right. So, but I know,
and I think
practice is great to look at.
Yeah.
That comes with sports.
Yeah.
I think that's a good part of sports is it helps kids develop that, ability to handle pressure later in life.
Yep.
So I think that's definitely there's pros and cons to that as well. They don't want to have so much that it's negatively affecting them.
Yep.
But a little bit is good. It's good to support them with. So
yeah. But that's a good indicator of whether they're burnt out or just feeling the pressure to perform.
Yeah. Right.
So,
definitely.
Yep.
So I'd say recap of today's episode, we kind of talked about, importance of athletic development in kids, avoiding early specialization, or if there's, your kid really likes one sport, maybe some other strategies that we can help support that in a healthy way. Strength training for kids, why it's important and how to do it safely. What a good general plan should look like for kids. And then lastly is, how parents can help support their kids in athletics and signs to look out for to make sure, they're not overdoing it too much.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
we debunked some myths, especially about the early specialization. We debunked some myths about how strength training, causes, stunts your growth and things like that. It does not stunt your growth. Strength training is an important part of adolescence, especially if you're involved in athletics. That's going to help just support your kids. And then we talked about some actions steps for parents that they can take if they're noticing a change in their kiddo as they're growing up and they're seeing changes in sports.
Cool.
Awesome.
And we've got a couple options for kids in the area. We have the Tiffin Sports Performance classes that we started. That's a collaboration between Legend PT and CrossFit Tiffin.
Coaching classes would be one of the three of us.
One of the three of us would be coaching that. And that's looking at athletic development, speed, power, agility, jumping, improving all of those things that will then carry over to improve them in the sport.
Translates to general athletic abilities.
And that program is also designed, like if we work with a football player, it's designed for them to do their normal training with their football team. They're not we don't want them to miss that.
Right.
But then come into us for the right amount of training. That's going to kind of be like the icing on the cake.
Be like an adjunct to what they're already doing.
Exactly. To help them get that extra edge. We've also got our CrossFit Kids classes going. They're going to get some physical development, but also, like we said before, the emphasis, the difference between the sports performance and the CrossFit Kids is in CrossFit Kids, the emphasis is on fun. So
cool. Awesome. Yeah, you can follow us. Share this with your friends if you think they would find it interesting. If you are a parent or you have people that are parents that have kids, maybe they're really young, they're about to get started in athletics, or you have kids that are currently in athletics, or if you just found this insightful or helpful, follow us at Tiffin Sports Performance on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to sign up for our Tiffin Sports Performance classes, you can check us out on Facebook or Instagram. You can call us at Legend PT at 419-455-1006, or Justin at Tiffin CrossFit at 419-494-1424. Either of us can help you get set up for those. I think that's really the big stuff. I think next week.
Justin, you want to talk about next week's, or not next week's, but our next podcast?
Our next podcast. Yeah. We're going to do a Q&A. So we're going to look at questions that people have from episode 1 and episode 2, and also any other questions we get in general.
Definitely.
We'll be making a post on our Instagram and Facebook asking for questions from people.
So if anyone listening has questions, just send us a DM on Instagram or Facebook at Tiffin Sports Performance, and we will see if we can
stay tuned. We'll answer all your questions.
We'll see if we can get that into our next episode.